name is Marilyn Booth, and I am a professor at the University of Oxford in the UK, and I'm also a literary translator. My research focuses on intellectual history and the history of literature in Arabic. Well, I started in the field more as a researcher, doing my PhD on an Egyptian poet. And as I went on, of course, my research involved translation, and it still does. But I love writing. I've always loved writing, and I decided to try my hand at translation, and I was encouraged by a couple of publishers. And so I just sort of dove in and started. There's no single answer to that question. Sometimes I read a novel or a short story collection, and I just feel like this has to be translated, and I love it, and I want to translate it. And several of my favorite translations are novels that I translated without having a publisher, including Sayyidat al-Qamar, by the way. I translated it and then had to find a publisher, and that is not usually an easy task. So I don't recommend that people do that. Other times, publishers come to me and ask me if I want to do something. Of course, I have to like the novel. I have not only like the novel, I have to feel that the novel speaks to me as a work of art. That's very important. And that I'm the right person to translate it. It differs from one book to the next, but I think also the challenge really of creating the author and creating the author's voice and the book's voice, the text's voice, the narrator's voice in another language, and figuring out how best to do that and how to convey that through a very different language. And creating a balance between leaving the original book in the translation and on the other hand, creating a new book in another language. It's always a difficult balance. And I think as a translator, we never feel like we do it quite well enough. You always feel you could do something more. And actually, I have found that in translating, for instance, expressions and so forth, often being literal or almost literal is the best way to do it. So I try to let the Arabic guide me. I'm also a translator who often leaves quite a lot of Arabic in the text, and then I have to come up with ways of explaining that, but without being heavy about it. Well, in Jokha al-Harathi's Sayyidat al-Qamar, Celestial Bodies, she uses proverbs, amthal, frequently. And I try to translate those as proverbs, and I don't usually come up with an equivalent English proverb. Instead, I work with the Arabic proverb. And it usually works, and I think usually it's clear. So that's not really, I don't necessarily leave that in the Arabic, but then I will leave certain words, certain aspects of material culture, certain expressions. I think especially in dialogue, when you're trying to get a character across, quite often it makes sense to leave the Arabic in. But again, it really differs from one work to another. Authors and translators working together is an extremely complicated one. Most of the authors that I've translated have been wonderful to work with. They've been very appreciative of what I do. They understand that translating is not a matter of just knowing English. They understand that it's an artistic enterprise, that I am an artist, I'm a writer, and they appreciate and respect that. But we often work together. I work closely with the authors. I ask them questions, and most authors are very receptive to that, and they're happy to work together. And I don't make any important decisions. Like if I think something does need to be changed or handled in a slightly different way, I don't do that without working with the author. I have been in a couple of situations where the author did not like my translation and was unwilling to work with me. I think sometimes translators don't pay enough attention to the artistic aspect of the work, to the author's or the narrator's voice, in the distinctive voice of the book, one could say. However, there are other issues One of them being funding. Funding is a huge issue. Publishers are still reluctant to take on translations because it's expensive for them. I'm sympathetic to publishers. It's a really difficult issue. It's not that we translators make very much money, but even to pay a translator is an added cost. And so I think there need to be new ways of trying to fund translation. I'm not sure what those ways are, but, and then the final thing I would mention, which I think is very important, is that there needs to be more of a culture of editing in Arabic. There is not a tradition of literary editing in Arabic. And so sometimes we translators are asked to also be literary editors, and that's really not our job. And so I think there are a number of institutional things that need to be worked on. In terms of translation, I'm right now working on Hoda Barakat's Barid al-Layl and on Jocha al-Harathi's more recent novel, Narinja. To me, it's a very political act in the broadest sense, to bring voices from one part of the world to another and to try to get people to read these works. So I see it as a very important activist endeavor, and I love doing it. There are more and more works now translated, and I'm actually quite optimistic because I think there's a really good movement towards translating more Arabic literature, and I think there's an increasing audience, an expanding audience for it. But I hope that people are reading these works as artistic works of integrity.